Hircine is one of the most widely worshipped Daedric princes in the Elder Scrolls, and that's probably because he has a lot going on. He's the Lord of the Hunt, has way too many aspects, is weirdly linked with Christmas and the New Year, or at least the Elder Scrolls equivalents, is rather famously the dude behind lycanthropes, making him popular among furries I suppose, and has a sub-realm specifically for fishing. I'm not joking. He has Daedric lords to manage his sub-realms, and one of those sub-realms is fishing. So if you're one of those guys who puts fishing profile pictures on their dating apps, you've got a Daedric prince to worship. And as princes go, you could do a lot worse. You could pick Molag Bal. Ugh. Anyway, Hircine is one of those Daedric princes that's simultaneously complicated and simple. He's a bit of a paradox, and while you can boil his whole thing into simply hunting and enjoying the thrill of the hunt, his complications come from his literal being, and that is reflected in some of the strange ways in which he's worshipped. So enough dilly-dallying, let's take a look at the Lord of the Hunt, the Daedric Prince, Hircine.
I've been watching you for ages, it seems. You have the makings of a fine hunter. You may even be my champion.
So, to start with, let's have a look at what Hircine actually is. He's a Daedric Prince, and I explained what they are specifically in my previous video in the series all about Hermaeus Mora, but I'll give you a quick refresher here. A Daedric Prince is a divine being, known as an Ed Arda, which translates to the original spirits, and there are three categories. The Aedra, who helped create the world and gave their power to it. The Magna Gi, who started to help create the world, but didn't want to give up their own powers after they discovered Lorkhan's deception, and so they left, bursting through the sky into Aetherius, creating the sun and the stars. Finally, 3. The Daedric Princes, who took one look at the world building project and decided they had better things to do, like go fishing apparently. Now these Daedric Princes already have their own realms in Oblivion, and Hircine's is known as the Hunting Grounds because he hunts on these grounds. Yeah, he's the Lord of the Hunt, not the Lord of creative naming. The realm itself is said to be an endless forest, where Hircine and his hunters hunt practically anything. Humans, beasts, Daedra, and carp. Yeah, I'm gonna keep bringing that up. While he's about all things hunt, his spheres are specifically the greatest game, the chase, the sacrifice of mortals, and the sport of Daedra. Remember the sport aspect, because that also means sportsmanship. Essentially fairness in a way, something that I, as a mediocre tennis player, can really get behind, and this fairness is part of the reason he's reasonably mainstream in Tamriel as Daedric Princes go. I don't think this sportsmanship is quite far enough to be considered honourable, but it typically means he's not about to bring mass destruction. He's about the thrill, the sport, and the skill of the hunt. This makes him pretty neutral as Daedra go, but that doesn't mean he's all sunshine and rainbows. Actually, we'll get into why he's specifically against sunshine, and there is a bit of an elephant in the room with Hircine. Or rather, a werewolf. Hircine is the father of man-beasts, and the guy who invented lycanthropy. All kinds of werebeasts owe their curse or gift, depending on your outlook, to Hircine, and he refers to them as his children, acting as their guardian. I suppose it's similar to how pure-blooded vampires, specifically women, are referred to as the daughters of Coldharbour, with Coldharbour being Molag Bal's realm, especially because vampirism is also considered both a gift and a curse. As a result, any lycanthrope ends up in Hircine's hunting grounds after death, presumably as one of his hunters, although if you've played Hircine's quest in Skyrim, you know that the Lord of the Hunt wants you to go after a werewolf called Sinding, so perhaps some are prey. Anything is fair game in the hunting grounds after all. Speaking of what we see in Skyrim, we do get a sense that the people of Tamriel know that being a lycanthrope puts them in the hunting grounds. The companions in the circle are clearly well aware, and their differing views represent the typical reactions to lycanthropy in Tamriel. Is either viewed as a curse, such as the viewpoint of Kodlak, Vilkas and Farkas, who seek to be cured, or a gift that enhances the enjoyment of the thrill of the hunt, even in death, as is the viewpoint of Ayla. She is probably what you'd expect of a Hircine worshipper that has largely managed to integrate into regular society, given that she goes on and on about the thrill of the hunt, and yes, she's a werewolf. On the topic of Ayla, let's have a look at how Hircine is worshipped across Tamriel.
There is no retribution in the hunt. It is not vengeance I seek, but the blood course of a living hunt.
Strangely, we're actually going to start with one of the people who don't care much for Hircine worship, since I think it's an emphasis of how neutral Hircine tends to be: the Dunmer. You see, the Dunmer worship 3 Daedric Princes as their main gods, known as the 3 Good Daedra. But take that good part with a pinch of salt, because Methala and Boethia are in it, and not a lot about either of them is particularly all that good. The Dunmer also have their bad Daedra, which they call the House of Troubles. Now Hircine is in neither category, and while the Dunmer are famous Daedra worshippers, they don't much care for Hircine, viewing him as neither good, in a way that is worthy of worship, nor bad, to steer clear of. This isn't the case with another type of elf, the Altmer, who are almost vigilant of Stendarr-esque in their hatred of the Daedra. Hircine doesn't actively work for or against any country from what I can tell, but the isolationist nature of the Altmer and their home being the Somerset Isles made them vulnerable to lycanthropy. This was the case in the Second Era, during the time of ESO, when Bosmer immigrants came to the Somerset Isles and began to spread lycanthropy, with the Altmer, who weren't all that used to having a bunch of skin changes around, unaware of how best to deal with them. Apparently, Daedra worship increased in the Third Era, where the mainline Elder Scrolls games, From Arena to Oblivion, take place. But with the Thalmor back in charge in the Fourth Era, when Skyrim takes place, I very much doubt you'd find many Hircine worshippers around, with them likely suffering from prosecution, and if they feel that strongly, they've probably left the Somerset Isles. This is a completely different story with another type of elf, the Bosmer. And while these guys are cannibals, and oh by the way, these guys are cannibals, they're probably the most chill of the bunch. Somehow. That's probably a damning indictment on the other elves rather than a compliment for the Bosmer. Still, given their nature as nature lovers, and that some follow the Green Pact, where they don't harm plant life of any kind, it shouldn't be a surprise that they love a good hunt, and thus worship Hircine. They use bones for a lot after all, including making fires. Their relationship with Hircine might even help explain how werewolves came about too, but this requires a bit more context. So, the Bosmer's main god is a dude called Y'ffre. According to the Bosmer, before Y'ffre was able to stabilise the forms of life, living beings were an ooze, or rather the ooze, essentially a chaotic, formless existence that forever changed. You can think of it as the Elder Scrolls equivalent of the primordial soup. When Y'ffre stabilised the forms of life, making the Bosmer as we know them today, he created the Green Pact, a bunch of rules that the Bosmer had to follow, which included not harming plant life of any kind. This also includes not ever changing a Bosmer's form, which seems pretty against what Hircine's all about with his lycanthropy, except for one condition: the Wild Hunt. I mentioned the Wild Hunt in this Oblivion Crisis video, but long story short, it is a ritual in which the Bosmer, out of desperation, can shapeshift into monstrous eldritch beasts, sort of partially returning to this ooze-like state. The Bosmer believe that Hircine is the source to tap into these transformations, and also think that the Lord of the Hunt wishes for them to return to this chaotic state, given that these Wild Hunt creatures are essentially lycanthropes on steroids. They can turn into almost anything, like a wave of blood, or whatever in Oblivion this chimera creep is. He's like a lion, deer, crocodile thing. Actually, that sounds kinda familiar. Huh. With the Bosmer's hunting nature and this deep connection to the ooze, which also allows them to change form beyond any lycanthrope in Tamriel, it has been suggested that Y'ffre and Hircine are linked in some way, and the Bosmer aren't the only people to link them. I've even seen a theory suggesting that they are one in the same, but I don't quite buy it, because Y'ffre is about as far from a Daedric Prince as you can get. He gave himself so completely to the creation of the world that it's tough to think of anyone else who's more of an Aedra. The Bosmer, and practically everybody else, see the pair as separate entities as well, with Hircine's name being used for good luck on a hunt. And it's probably used quite a lot considering how often a Bosmer hunts.
Well, this wasn't part of my plan.
Hey man, I'm gonna eat you.
When we go from pointy ears to round ones, the story seems to change, at least a little. There are, of course, many cults that worship Hircine, but as far as the Imperials are concerned, he is one of the 16 acceptable blasphemes. Essentially Tiber Septim's rebranding of the Daedric Princes, but that didn't make many of them more inclined to worship Daedra. There's not really much more here for the Imperial side of things, but Bretons have two subcultures that worship the Lord of the Hunt. There are the Druids, who call Hircine the Elk of Arrows, which is a pretty cool name. On the topic of elks, you know that elk skull that Hircine is usually represented with? That apparently comes from the Grat Elk, one of Y'ffre's champions and a trophy of a successful hunt. And remember this because this will come up later. It's more proof of Y'ffre's link to Hircine, as are the Druids themselves, who are known to follow Y'ffre's way of life, known as the Green. The other subculture is the Weird Covens, which are ironically spelt weirdly. Essentially a bunch of hippie witches, who have quite a variety of ways to worship Hircine. Some are pretty chill, like the Viridian Weird, who offer cures for lycanthropy, while others worship his more feral side. The most obvious example is the Glenmoral Coven, whom we see in the Companion's Quest in Skyrim, but seem to originate from High Rock. Then there are the Nords, who don't like Hircine for the same reason that Kodlak, Vilkas and Farkas don't. Hircine's gift, or curse, of lycanthropy means you can't get into Sovngarde, thus the Nords aren't too happy about it. I am generalising here because there are some Nords who actively worship Hircine, like the Werebear troop we meet on Solstheim. The Red Guards don't seem to care much for Hircine in any capacity, and given that their culture comes from another continent, Yokuda, it might be because Hircine never really had any influence in that continent to begin with, so I guess that then leads us to the Beast Folk. Now the Argonians could not give a shit. They are known for fishing, but even then they don't mention Hircine anywhere from what I can tell. I do get suspicious whenever I see nothing about something in Elder Scrolls lore. I sometimes wonder if I've missed a scrap written on Michael Kirkbride's napkin one time, but yeah, I got nothing here for the Argonians or the Redguards. This is probably due to how the Argonians worship the Hist, and seem to be the only race to do so, with their culture revolving around these wacky trees. But this is not the case with the Khajiit. Now the Khajiit are known for their very strange interpretations of practically everything. Everything is some form of cat. For example, this is their iteration of Sher Gorath. Look at him. They call him the Skooma Cat as well. That's like calling him the Crack Cat. Now, Hircine is known as the Hungry Cat, which... oh sure, these cat people crack me up. Anyway, the Khajiit seem to respect the Hungry Cat, especially hunters. Interestingly, the Khajiit also believe there is a connection to Hircine and Y'ffre, but they actually explain it. You see, there's a bit of a love triangle going on. Hircine loved Nirni, essentially the spirit of the planet Nirn, but Nirni chose to mate with Y'ffre instead, where the pair had many children. This is where another Daedric Prince comes into the picture, Namira, and she corrupts Y'ffre, making him kill Nirni in a frenzy. For vengeance, this is where Hircine slays Y'ffre's champion, the Grat Elk, and he, Azura and Kinnereth, a bit of an odd trio, get together to slay Y'ffre. Because mortals are the children of Nirni, and Hircine still loves Nirni, he is thus fond of mortals, and the Khajiit share this fondness with Hircine. They don't really like lycanthropy, mainly because they see it as a parody of themselves, which, sure, whatever, but they are known to have built temples to Hircine in the past. While not a beast race, I'm just going to squeeze them at the end here, I can't find anything with the orcs. They do go hunting quite a bit, but orc culture revolves around Malakath specifically, and as a result, they often see hunting as a test of strength. So this is where Hircine gets pushed at the side a little bit here, although I don't think Hircine's all that bothered. Now that covers all the main provinces, but you can't really do a Hircine video without looking at the people with the most details about the Lord of the Hunt, and while they don't have a land of their own anymore, they certainly have a very unique culture, the Reachfolk.
But you must first do a service for my glory. Your fealty is precious to me. I will make good use of it.
You may know the Reachfolk as the Forsworn by Skyrim, that's their rebranding, and they have a long history of worshipping Hircine. This partly comes from their relationship with hag-ravens and witches who worship the Lord of the Hunt, and while we don't see this in Skyrim, they apparently often have lycanthropes in their ranks. Hircine is to them what Azura is to the Dunmer and Y'ffre is to the Bosmer, I suppose, in that he is the main man, as these Reachfolk believe that Hircine was the one that gave them the Reach as their home. You can even see this in the way that the Forsworn dress in Skyrim, with these deer skull helms, similar to Hircine himself, but what interests me the most are the different aspects the Reachfolk have for Hircine. They're quite ancient Nord in a way, as most are animal aspects, and there are 5 in total. There's Alrabeg, the Hunter, who I assume looks like the most normal iteration of Hircine you're used to seeing. There's Storabeg, the Skin Changer, representing lycanthropy. Urakan or Urasanbeg, the Great Stag, not quite sure on the pronunciation of that one, and Hrokibeg, the Great Bear, and the aspect of strength, and finally Gollibeg, the Quick Fox. Strangely, Gollibeg seems to have a connection with Lorkhan, the trickster god who helped create the world. You see, Lorkhan's Nord iteration is Shor, who has the form of a fox, and Gollibeg, who is also a fox, is known to be quite a trickster as well. He demonstrates the trickery and cunning needed in a hunt. While there is some overlap between Lorkhan and Gollibeg here, I think it's largely coincidental, especially if you know Lorkhan's story and how he's practically the opposite of what a Daedric Prince is. Check out this video for that one. Still, these different aspects are treated as distinct beings, not just forms of the same dude, and weirdly, the easiest way to illustrate what I mean is by looking at the Elder Scrolls equivalent of Christmas and the New Year. And no, I'm not kidding.
You have arrived. The others have been here for days now, and you are the last. It is time for my hunt.
So, in Tamriel there's a continental holiday called Saturalia, being the Christmas equivalent, and the New Life Festival, being the New Year. These two sort of blend together, and for whatever reason, Hircine has a lot to do with this festive time of year. He's not quite Father Christmas or any of the reindeer. In fact, he'd probably hunt the reindeer if he wanted to and turn them into IKEA meatballs. I actually don't think IKEA meatballs have reindeer meat, but either way, let's tell the story. According to the Reachman, 2 of Hircine's aspects get into a scrap. Storabeg, the skin changer dude, prefers it when it's night, because of the moon and its association with lycanthropes, so when it's time for the new year, and the days start getting longer again, he wants anything but that. As a result, he chases the sun in the hopes of eating it to make the nights longer, sort of Skull and Hattie style in the Norse mythology. We obviously know how bad a world without the sun would be. It's essentially the plot of Dawnguard, So the Reachmen summon Hrokibeg, the strong bear, to restrain Storabeg, preventing him from going full Nico Avocado on the sun. It's not really the most jolly tale around, though, is it? You're excited for the new year, ready for the whole new me thing, and then you have to worry about a giant godly skin changer eating the sun, so you have to summon a giant bear. To be fair, a kaiju fight sounds a lot better than a fireworks show. Still, the Nordic version of the tale is somehow more extreme. You see, lycanthropes are known for their hunger. Think about it this way, we eat a bunch of hearts as werewolves, and Storabeg is no exception. He feasted on the volcanoes of Morrowind, created the Alakir Desert by drinking from the Iliac Bay, which seems very extreme, and then cleaned his teeth with the trees of Valenwood. You see, even a Daedric Prince practices oral hygiene. Brush your teeth, people. Anyway, still being hungry, he looked up to the moons, Massa and Secunda, and declared that he could reach them, taking over their forms and replacing them. The moons replied that the sun had their backs if Storabeg tried anything that crazy. The skin changer just said, "I'd eat the suns too, and the stars. I'm that hungry." I mean, the sun and stars are just holes in the sky in the Elder Scrolls lore, but whatever. You do you, man, wolf thing. It's like if beard meets food ever ended up in Tamriel. The idea was to plunge the world into darkness, and Storabeg's grand plan was to wait when the sun was at its weakest, during the Old Life Festival, essentially New Year's Eve, to try and have some fiery lunch. Still, it's the sun, you can't eat the sun, so Storabeg gets his face burned by the sun's rays. The moons laugh at him, and everyone gets to enjoy a new year. It is weird to me though that two different cultures have stories about Hircine trying to eat the sun for New Year's, and this could be because of how close the Reach and Skyrim are, with the Reach being in Skyrim as of the game Skyrim. Oh, and speaking of Skyrim, it's worth looking into Hircine's appearances in the games, which gives us an idea of the kind of interactions he has with mortals and a little bit about his personality.
So, you are the one. You have escaped my hounds and beaten back the other challengers.
I think it's safe to say that Hircine is most famous for his great hunts. We participate in one during the Sinding quest, in which we can either defend the werewolf, who is the target of a great hunt, or be the one to put him down. Actually, we can do both if you want both artifacts. Now apparently, these great hunts happen all the time in the hunting grounds, but are rumoured to take place once an era on Nirn, which is why there's such a massive deal for hunters and worshippers of Hircine. The one in Skyrim isn't the most grand great hunt around, even if the visual in the Bloated Man's Grotto is really neat. But an example of the kind of event Hircine can put on, if he's feeling up for the task, is the Great Hunt during the Bloodmoon DLC for Morrowind. The Skull refer to it as the Hunter's Game, and as part of it, Hircine enlists either hares or hounds, with hares being the hunted and hounds being the hunters. Now, when you think of hares, you're probably thinking of some feeble, maybe slippery targets, but the thing is, these hares were packing some serious heat. You had the leader of the Skull, Tharstin Heartfang, Falx Carius, a then captain of the Imperial Legion, whose undead version we fight in Skyrim, and Karstag. Yes, that Karstag. The one who farts blizzards and hits like a giant on TRT. It's unknown if the Nerevarin was put into the hunt as a hound or hare, but the dude's a godkiller. The fact that he's in the hunt to begin with is pretty mad. Of course, Ryan Nerevar got the job done and won the Great Hunt by defeating Hircine's hounds and one of his hunters, which was an aspect of himself, either strength, speed or guile. That's not to mention the crazy pre-show Hircine put on too for the Great Hunt. He made sure that people would know about the event too through the Bloodmoon prophecy, essentially signs that there will be a great hunt on Solstheim, which included putting werewolves on the island, raising a giant pillar of fire over a frozen lake, a Hawker massacre, and finally turning Secunda red, hence the whole Bloodmoon thing. It seems to be part of the overall presentation of a Great Hunt. He put all of this prep into the Solstheim Great Hunt, but when it was time for Skyrim's, he just put a werewolf in a cave and said, "Here's a red moon, go ham." Come on, Hircine, where's the spectacle here, man? Aside from the Great Hunt, Hircine's presence is also felt greatly in the Companions questline, in which the members of the Circle are turned into werewolves, thus preventing them from going to Sovngarde. The thing that makes this a big deal is that the Companions can trace their origins to the original 500 Companions, essentially the first people from Atmora to settle in Skyrim, led by the great Ysgramor. Now Ysgramor is an Atmoran, and as far as the Nords are concerned, he's the guy whose example they should follow. I mean, he hates elves, he's very good at war, is one of Shor, aka Lorkhan's main guys, and he built Windhelm, essentially being the guy that founded the country of Skyrim. So the fact that his organisation has been taken over by those tied to Hircine, and are thus denied passage to Sovngarde, is a pretty big deal. The members of the Circle don't even seem to be Hircine worshippers, besides Ayla and potentially Skjold, and when the majority of them get the chance to cure themselves, they do by getting you to slay the Glenmoral witches. But how did the Companions end up with the werewolf blood? Well, it wasn't always the case. In the Second Era, there was a dude called Colonel Longnose, who basically decided that the Companions at the time were softies and usurpers or something, so he got those he deemed worthy to meet up in the wilds. There, he decided to restructure the Companions with a leadership group, known as the Circle, named after Ysgramor's circle of ship captains who sailed from Atmora. Colonel wanted to make sure that the old ways were venerated, with the phrase "honour through blood" being his main thing. The formation of the Circle allowed for secret keeping within the Companions, and this later led to Turfig he doesn't have a title, he's just Turfig. Anyway, this led to Turfig making a pact with the Glenmoral witches to give the Circle the beast blood, possibly just to make the Companions more powerful. I couldn't find an exact reason why Turfig turned to lycanthropy, although he is described as a good but short-sighted harbinger, so perhaps he was tricked by the prospect of greater power. Trickery is part of Hircine's deal after all, and Turfig doesn't sound like a Hircine worshipper, given that he tried to go to Sovngarde after his death only for Hircine to snatch him from the Whalebone Bridge and bring him to the hunting grounds. His pact lasted for hundreds of years, although if you, John Skyrim, as the new harbinger of the Companions, rid Farkas, Vilkas, Kodlak and then yourself of the beast's blood, it seems like Hircine's shadow over the Companions will finally be lifted, as Ayla would be the only werewolf left in the Circle. Granted, I'm not really sure how much Hircine cares. Most of the dead harbingers are hiding in Ysgramor's tomb anyway, their spirits avoiding Hircine. And it doesn't really affect his hunting escapades. He probably does find the whole thing at least a little funny though. So, Hircine is another neutral and kinda specific Daedric Lord. He's definitely not one to cross. He did try to eat the sun for the new year after all, and is known to slay other gods, but he is all about the hunt. He doesn't necessarily care about conquest, burning Tamriel to the ground or doing whatever nonsense Sheogorath does. He's all about the hunt, and as a result he's pretty fair as Daedric Princes go. He cares greatly for the sportsmanship aspect of the hunt, and the hares, essentially the targets of his hunts, need to have a fair shot at escaping. Otherwise, what would be the point of the hunt? Where would the thrill be? While the hunts are tipped toward the hunter, since Hircine is the lord of the hunt, not the lord of being hunted, that sportsmanship element shows that he cares more about the process than the result. Something rare among Daedric Princes. He will take a loss relatively well, especially for a divine being, and if you find yourself at his mercy, you will always have a chance. The real big downside is the whole lycanthropy thing. Yeah, losing your mind to beastly instincts and potentially ripping someone to shreds is not the best thing in the world. Also, eating the sun. Yeah, that was a bit mental. He's also pretty violent, but I'm not a hunter, so if you are, perhaps Hircine's worship appeals to you. Or if you're a fisherman, post about your biggest catches. Hircine appreciates it.
Reaches the shore. What is it?
That is huge! One of the best fish I've ever seen, mate.
This monster is not what I expected to.
Thanks for watching episode 2 of my Daedric Prince series. Who do you guys want to see next? Let me know. I'm leaning toward Malakath or Sheogorath, mainly because I find those two funny for differing reasons. But if a bunch of you guys are clamouring for another prince to get the love first, then I'll get to that beforehand. Also, the World Cup's starting soon. I might do a video on that. A very, very normal video about Skyrim and football. Anyway, please do the whole YouTube ritual of liking, commenting and subscribing, and I hope to see you next week for another video.
The wolf bore its fangs and spread its claws and tore at its own hide. Drink the blood and become my sons, or by dawn you'll never survive. And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's bound hunter. And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight star.